The Island is a captivating film that takes viewers on a journey of justice and redemption. The story revolves around LAPD officer Mark Etheridge as he uncovers dark secrets and confronts powerful forces, leading to a web of intrigue, power struggles, and personal vendettas. In this video, we will delve into the detailed plot of the film. But before starting, I would really appreciate it if you hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any movie explanation. Let's start. The film opens with a band playing in a quaint island cafe, which goes by the name Island. The band's lead singer, Nora, is liked by Alvarez, who is the owner of the cafe. Alvarez compliments her on her appearance and singing voice before inviting her to sit at his table. He is so taken aback that he extends an offer to Nora to play at the cafe every Saturday night for a year at triple her salary. Nora immediately accepts and is overjoyed. Not long after, Alvarez requests that a bartender bring Nora some wine. Sadly, the bartender spills wine on her clothing by mistake. Thankfully, Nora says she can change clothing and accepts it. Alvarez, though, is not happy. He doesn't want his key guest to witness someone wearing a stained outfit. He brutally murders the bartender in front of Nora, which is shocking. Nora is terrified by this and comes to the conclusion that Alvarez is a dangerous person. It comes out that Alvarez is the head of a significant mafia in America, not just a regular cafe owner. He has been living on the island for 4 years, utilizing it as a launching pad for more unlawful endeavors. The story now takes place in Los Angeles, where we are introduced to Deputy Phil and Police Chief Mark. They are operating anonymously, pretending to be fake criminals who want to do some illegal business at the airport. The real criminals and their accomplice show up soon after. While Phil is getting ready to give the money over, Mark goes over to the main dealer to arrest him and take the illegal products. But when Phil chooses to flip the scene and attack, things take a surprising turn. After a fight breaks out, Mark learns the heartbreaking news that his brother has been found dead. This devastating news takes over Mark, and he immediately returns to his island village. He finds out at his brother's funeral that his younger sibling was the bartender whom Alvarez killed not too long ago. The loss of her youngest child has left Mark's mother heartbroken. When the incident happened, Mark's brother was on his way home from work. Therefore, there are rumors that criminals could be responsible for the murder. Alvarez and his allies are also being investigated. 2 henchmen come up to Mark at the funeral to offer their condolences. Mark and his mother head back home after the service. Looking over old pictures of him and his brother and nostalgia, Mark discovers it has been 11 years since he last visited the island. Being the head of the police had kept him away. He makes the serious pledge to seek revenge for his brother's passing. Mark visits the island's police station the following day and makes his first appointment with the police chief, who happens to be his childhood buddy B. They have a close relationship, and B sends his sympathies on Mark's younger brother's passing. He gives Mark his word that they will look into the matter right away. Unexpectedly, Mark runs into his ex-girlfriend Akilah, a female martial arts instructor. While he is there, it's interesting to note that after an 11-year separation, she is obviously happy to see him. As they spoke, Akilah expressed her sympathy for Mark's brother's passing. Mark asked about his brother's everyday activities and any possible gang affiliation, since many had formed since Mark's disappearance. Akilah acknowledged that she didn't know exactly which gangs were still active on the island. She did, however, bring up his younger brother's involvement with an American by the name of Alvarez. Akilah revealed, quite unexpectedly, that Alvarez was not who he seemed. He was a mafia boss, that's for sure. She disclosed that his cafes were only fronts for his real business, which involved the sale of illicit products and guns. After learning of this startling information, Mark became increasingly suspicious of Alvarez and decided to speak with him. Mark requested Akilah to take care of his mother and make sure she was secure before leaving. Mark went to Alvarez's cafe shortly afterward, when he first ran into Alvarez's right-hand man, who had first blocked his path. Even Alvarez allowed Mark to enter. Mark wasted no time in confronting Alvarez on the passing of his sibling. Alvarez retaliated by concocting a story about how Mark's brother was murdered by strangers after coming home from a late-night duty. Unconvinced, Mark gave Alvarez a firm warning, saying that if he was involved in the crime, he would never get his forgiveness. Mark's threats were laughed off by Alvarez, who remained unmoved and emphasized that Mark was only a regular police officer. Still, Mark received a lead from Alvarez. He gave Mark the address of a gangster-friendly cafe and advised him to go there in order to find out more about his brother's passing. After he left Alvarez, he gave his right-hand guy the command to gather northern gang members in order to deal with Mark. Subsequently that evening, Mark visited his closest friend, who had a hot dog stand, and asked about some guns he had given his friend. The firearms, it was said to Mark, had been stashed away in an abandoned structure close to the beach. As the tale developed, it became clear that Mark and his best friend had held important positions on the island when they were teenagers. But when Mark moved to Los Angeles, their paths did not cross again. The mafia and foreign groups seeking dominance found their way to the island. Mark's closest friend was prepared to support him at all times, and predicted that he would seek revenge. After that, Mark traveled to a deserted structure close to the beach, where he discovered the secret weaponry that his closest friend had hidden. Mark arrived at the bistro that Alvarez had recommended. As darkness approached, he quickly turned off the music and addressed the thugs about his brother's murderer. But his charges were met with disdain, and a brawl broke out. Amazingly, Mark outwitted them, and the thugs were vanquished. He made his demand to find out who killed his brother once more. The gang leader angrily denied any knowledge of damage unto the residents. On Alvarez's orders, a gang of northern criminals burst in and started shooting at Mark. Luckily, he managed to avoid the bullets just in time, starting a wild chase. During the chase, Mark was able to render one of his assailants unconscious. He eventually located a hiding place and avoided the criminals until they were unable to locate him. Alvarez called his group and let them know that they were having trouble finding Mark. Alvarez was so enraged by this information that he gave the order for his group to hurt Mark's mother. They arrived at Mark's house shortly after and broke in, shooting at what they thought was Mark's sleeping mother. When they looked closer, they saw it was nothing more than a pillow. Mark's ex-girlfriend Akilah had taken security measures to protect Mark's mother. Subsequently, we witness Mark and B, the chief of police, examining the crime scene at Mark's home. Mark couldn't help but think that his mother could have been attacked if he hadn't given her to Akilah during this time. Then B told Mark that his informant had just given him information on his brother's murder. Remarkably, Nora, a female vocalist, was one of the witnesses from that era. B said that Nora is now staying in room number 18 in a motel close to the church. The following day, Mark is seen making his way to Nora's chamber. Nora is first hesitant to enter the door because she thinks Mark might be one of Alvarez's allies. Mark immediately shows her his police badge to reassure her that he is not a threat. Nora eventually lets up, and they start talking. As long as Nora is prepared to reveal the true identity of the person who killed the bartender who, it turns out, was Mark's younger sibling, Mark guarantees that he would help her leave the island safely. With trepidation, Nora confesses that Alvarez murdered Mark's brother because he dropped a glass of wine on her dress. She discloses that Alvarez has kept her stranded on the island out of concern that she would call the police to report the crime. When Mark finds out this startling revelation, he acts quickly. Mark then asks B to go with Nora to the pier so that she can leave the island safely. After that, B takes Nora to the pier, and Mark starts preparing to get revenge on Alvarez for his brother's passing. The story now centers on Alvarez, who gives his dependable mercenaries orders to find Mark. These mercenaries arrived on the island a few hours later and go straight to Mark's house to look for him. Akilah, Mark, and his mother have gathered at his house in the meantime. In order to be ready to face Alvarez, Mark chooses to leave his mother in Akilah's care during this period. The sound of an oncoming automobile abruptly draws their attention. It's the group of hired guns Alvarez sent. Mark grabs a gun and marches his mother and Akilah around to the back of the home. Two of the mercenaries stay beside the car, and the other two go into the house. After finding evidence that Mark has circled back around the home, these two mercenaries decide to pursue him inside. There was gunfire between the two mercenaries and Mark when they were able to catch up during the chase. As B is encountered by the other two mercenaries securing the car, a sudden shooting breaks out. B drives them away with some success. Mark, on the other hand, tries to capture one of the mercenary so that the other can flee. When B calls Mark to find out where he is, Mark replies that he is currently protecting Akilah and his mother at the home of his best buddy, who also happens to be a hot dog vendor. Not long after, the action moves to Alvarez and his right-hand guy, who are searching for Nora in a hotel room. When Alvarez learns that Nora is missing, he becomes furious and quickly kills the hotel security for not keeping her safe. Next, we go back to Mark, who rushes to his closest friend's house after dropping Akilah and his mother off. He is steadfast in his resolve to exact revenge on Alvarez for killing his brother. But just as Mark is about to leave, Akilah demands to go with him. Mark tries to talk her out of it, but she's too determined, so they decide to take on the challenge together. Mark and Akilah wait patiently for Chief of Police B to arrive in the evening. Together with B, they have come up with a strategy to face Alvarez. Curiously, B stays in his car when he arrives. Mark and Akilah walk up to the car, Worried, they are shocked to see that B is seriously hurt. Abruptly, gunshots breaks out, indicating Alvarez's remaining 3 mercenaries are launching an attack. While Mark tries his hardest to help the dying B, the mercenaries are able to capture Akilah in the turmoil. B exhorts Mark to keep up the struggle for justice and to defend the island from unscrupulous people like Alvarez. At this crucial juncture, the day after his death, we witness members of the community attending a service at a nearby church. A short while later, Mark shows up and passionately addresses the assembly, rallying them against the oppression inflicted by outsiders. He mobilizes everyone to stand up to Alvarez, the ringleader of illegal activity. Alvarez's actions have caused suffering not just for Mark's brother, but also for Chief of Police B and the kidnapped Akilah. The locals decide to band together and oppose Alvarez after hearing Mark's remarks. After that, Mark goes to the police station and steps in for Chief B for the time being. He rallies his fellow policemen there and emphasizes their new assignment. Mark was concentrating on learning more about Alvarez when Phil, his Los Angeles-based police partner, abruptly grabbed his attention. Phil had purposefully gone looking for Mark since he was concerned about his extended absence from Los Angeles. Mark said that he would not come back until he had faced Alvarez, a person in charge of his brother's demise and Akilah's kidnapping. Phil took up Mark's cause entirely, seeing it as his own personal issue. Alvarez contacted Mark later that day, as if he had figured out that Mark had played a part in Nora's escape. Alvarez suggested a trade meeting for the next day at 7 o'clock. Nora for Akilah. After this conversation, Alvarez said he would leave Mark alone, provided Mark agreed to move on from everything. Even though Mark reluctantly accepted Alvarez's demands, he secretly understood that he wouldn't be truly forgiven until he had taken his retribution. To make matters worse, Mark couldn't bring Nora to the exchange that was supposed to happen in the morning, because she had already departed the island. Not long later, Phil received a message from Mark asking him to put together a squad from the local police department. In order to free Akilah from Alvarez's grasp, he designated Phil as the tandem commander. As their 7 a.m. appointment with Alvarez drew near, Phil consented to do as Mark had instructed. Mark was waiting for Alvarez at the prearranged location on the scheduled day, while Phil and his squad tried breaking into Alvarez's office in an effort to release Akilah. One of Alvarez's mercenaries confronted them, but Phil quickly neutralized the threat. Mark, meantime, found himself in direct confrontation with Alvarez and a reliable associate. Alvarez didn't take long to inquire as to Nora's whereabouts. Mark responded by telling a small white lie, saying that Nora would come when Akilah arrived, while he anxiously awaited information from Phil, who was in the middle of saving Akilah. He used this deception to gain additional time. The focus of the scenario then turns to Phil's situation. He was facing down the barrel of a mercenary's gun, but he had discovered Akilah. He had little options in that critical moment, so he decided to give up. Luckily, they were able to get rid of the mercenaries ultimately. Mark was promptly informed by Phil that Akilah was secure in his care. Mark informed Phil that Nora was safe in Los Angeles, and that she had no intention of going back to the island after hearing this. Alvarez threatened to hurt Akilah if Mark didn't comply. Mark stated calmly that Alvarez's goons had been dealt with and were no longer a threat. Alvarez was so incensed by this news that he gave his right-hand guy the order to shoot Mark, but Mark deftly rendered Alvarez's right-hand guy incapable. Then, when things seemed about to get dangerous, something unexpected happened. Suddenly, the man selling hot dogs and the people from the island appeared and surrounded Alvarez with their guns. Mark urged everyone to lay down their weapons and suggested that they square off against Alvarez in a duel to resolve their issues once and for all. Alvarez reluctantly accepted the task. Mark began the duel by imitating the steps Alvarez had taken against his younger brother in a previous scenario. Then, Mark and Akilah had a private moment together on the beach, reaffirming that they were once more a couple and that they intended to tie the knot soon. Mark turned down Phil's invitation to come back to Los Angeles shortly after that. He pledged to stay on the island and defend it against strangers vying for dominance. The movie ends with this choice. The movie's moral message was to always exercise caution, since you never know who might be a mafia boss hiding in plain sight, and things could get out of hand.